My name is Kat Sieber, and I am the Program Manager Outreach Services for IDF. I get the joy and honor of working with our Youth Advisory Committee, better known as the YAC. Come on in, come trickle in. I'm going to give you guys a second. If you are a member or have ever been a member of the YAC and or Teen Council, please stand so everyone can know who you are. All right. Please give them a round of applause because these are amazing kids, young adults. I'm an old person, so for me, I call them kids and they don't beat me up. Okay, we are tight to our 45 minutes, so hopefully we will be able to get through all of the information and be able to answer questions. If not, please look on our website for Ask IDF and or information for either Chase or Chris Duckett so that they can answer your questions. I have some housekeeping to go through, some disclaimers. The information presented during the session is not medical advice, nor is it intended to be a substitute for medical advice and or legal advice. I'm going to add that in there. Diagnosis or treatment, always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider, your own attorney, with questions concerning a medical condition and or one of the legal. Immune Deficiency Foundation, IDF, educational events offer a wide array of presentations, including content developed by healthcare and life management professionals. The views and opinions expressed by guest speakers do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of IDF. Now to the fun parts. All right, welcome again to Zebra's Guide to Job Hunting. I'm going to welcome Chase Janes. Chase is the president of Puzzle Engineering. It's a commercial construction company that constructs playgrounds. It is based in Southern California. He brings extensive experience in leadership and management, having previously held positions within Starbucks. Chase is passionate about raising awareness for chronic illness, diagnosed with ITP at a young age, followed by CVID in 2006. He actively advocates for individuals living with similar conditions. Outside of work, Chase cherishes his time with his wife and 2 sons. He enjoys outdoor activities like hiking and staying up to date with the latest technological advancements. Please give Chase a round of applause. Our next presenter is Christopher S. Duckett, Director, Talent Management, Immune Deficiency Foundation. Chris is a human resources professional. Don't hold that against him, I don't. With more than 20 years of experience leading teams in talent acquisition, employee relations, employee engagement, benefits, HRIS administration, and data analysis. His career has spanned multiple industries, including healthcare, nonprofit, and retail. Chris served as the workforce team leader with CORE, was awarded the 2019 Malcolm Baldrige Quality Award, also served as an examiner for the Mid-Atlantic Association for Performance Excellence. With Immune Deficiency Foundation, he serves as the Director of Talent Management for a workforce of 40 employees, including myself, and more than 400 volunteers serving the PI community, many of which are in the room, including fellow presenter Chase Janes. Welcome to you both. I'm going to turn it over to your expertise, and thank you all for participating.
I'll use this mic up here, but I need to answer the slides. Thank you. So Kat likes to give HR people a hard time, but she just needs to remember I hired her. So thank you all for being here. I think you're going to get a lot out of this session. I want to point out as we dive into this that we're going to cover a number of topics, but any one of the things we're going to talk about we could spend hours upon. So we're going to hit high level on a number of things. Big key takeaways and hot takes out of this are going to be the job search. Where do I find the jobs and what should I be looking for? Interviews, prepping first to ace the question to get the job. So a little bit of let's call it ideas on preparing for the interview, how to find the interview questions, what you should expect, and how to answer interview questions. And then we are also going to touch base on resumes. In fact, that's probably the first thing we're going to do. and really kind of knocking out that sort of myth about what a resume should look like or shouldn't look like. And I'm probably going to share a few things along the lines that might surprise you when it comes to resumes. Now, the unique thing about this presentation is you have the HR perspective of job hunting, but what's great is we have Chase. Chase is a business owner, so you get to see his perspective on a good candidate, right? So you get to hear from him what he might look for in a resume or what he might look for. You know, we HR people are a breed of our own, so the actual hiring folks are the folks that we want to also hear from as well. So that's where we're going to head. Hopefully you'll have some good takeaways. We'll have a Q&A at the end as well, if time permits, but we'll dive right in. So we're going to talk first a little bit about resumes. So you'll see two resumes up on the screen, and we're going to have just a kind of a dialogue as we go through this. I would encourage you as you're looking at those, what do you think of those two resumes? And just kind of think about which of those do you think we prefer. And so I'll throw it over to Chase. Just when you look at resumes, what do you look for? What's important for you to see in a resume?
So whenever I'm personally making a resume, I always like the first design with all the pictures, but it's not the best. Realistically, when you're inputting a resume into a job search engine, it's going to pull the data, and the more pictures, the more images you add, the more complexity you add to it, the harder that job search engine is going to be to aggregate your data into a way that the person actually looking at your resume can read it. So you really want to keep it simple, concise. You don't really need a picture. Realistically, if someone is looking through resumes, they might be looking through 150 resumes, so they're going to glance and move on, glance, move on, glance, move on. So you don't need it to be super complicated. I feel like unless you're doing design work, but we're not talking about that. Just your basic resume, you should keep it simple.
Right. The two resumes that are up there, they're obviously great looking resumes, but I'm going to share a little HR perspective on you and something that might be eye-opening for most of the folks in the room. The person in an organization who's actually reading the resumes, so when you apply for a job and that resume gets sent, if that's a larger organization, the person reading the resume is the lowest person on the totem pole in the HR department. So think about, if you're applying for a job, what qualifications do you need to have, and how does my resume easily reflect that I fit that job? So the resumes that are up on the screen, there are two there. The one on the left is pretty and it's cool looking and it catches your eye, but the one on the right is simpler and more to the point. Mm-hmm. Now, to Chase's point, I use a system called UKG. That's our HRIS system. That's not a plug, it's just what we use. Now, there is a way when you apply for a job that you can just dump your resume into the system and it'll scan and upload all of the key data right in there, so it makes it real simple when you apply. The one on the left would not work. Okay, so again, keeping it simple is the way to go. Now, there's a question that often gets thrown around. Should a resume be one page or can it be two or three? What are your thoughts? How many people think their resume should be one page? Okay? What do you think, Chase?
Yeah, one page is the best, and to be honest, even if it's 2 pages, that's not necessarily a terrible thing, but as a person looking at candidates, I'm not going to read the second page, unless something really stands out, but truthfully, I've got a lot of resumes to get through, and I'm just going to focus on name, address, experience, can I contact them, and go from there usually.
Yeah. All right, cover letters. How many people like a good cover letter? Okay?
I don't even know what cover letters are for, to be honest.
Okay. Every cover letter says the same thing. It always talks about how qualified you are and how great you are and how much you want to work for the company. That's fantastic. I will look at a resume, oh look, they sent a cover letter. I put that down and I read the resume. So I'm not going to tell you not to send a cover letter, but to be honest, don't spend hours upon hours writing a cover letter that most people really are not going to read. You're dealing with online application systems at this point, okay? So the reality of it is, the information that you need to show to be qualified for the position is the first, most important part of that resume. Again, you can send a cover letter, but the reality of it is, it may not get looked at. All right, that's why we have the resume reality. So wouldn't say no, but now the only difference with that, the only thing where I would say that might be a little different, is if you are in a situation where you can actually hand your resume to a person, so a career fair, college career fair, You might get something with that, but that's another place where that cover letter may work. But for the most part, applying online could take or leave it, to be honest. Okay? So again, with resumes, keep it simple, keep it honest, don't fluff your resume. There's a slide we're going to come up to earlier where Kat joked about those HR people. You're going to see this in a second. We are not really your friend. And I mean that jokingly, but you're going to hear some things here in a minute that we are here first and foremost to protect the organization. That's what we're here for. So don't fluff up your resume. We hunt for those things. And if you fluff up your resume, you're probably weeded out. It just has to be accurate. Okay? All right. We'll jump into this. This is like I mentioned, those nosy HR people. We are. So what we're going to talk about now, I'm going to actually put the slide down because we're going to spend a little time on this. We obviously are at the PI conference. This is a question that, again, we could spend hours upon hours upon hours on. HR people need to know certain things, but there's times when we don't need to know things. So let's talk about, first and foremost, before we get on the topic of when do we share a chronic illness? When does that have to be brought up? I think you're going to find it's could be never. So everything speaks. When you write your resume, make sure again it's clean. We talked about that. If you are awarded an interview, and we're doing Zoom interviews or Teams interviews, check your background. Make sure you know what's behind you. Make sure you know what's around you. We see everything, and everything speaks. Important, social media presence. If you have a LinkedIn page, I'm going to it. If you have a Facebook page, I'm going to go see what's on that too. Now, a lot of times that may mean no big deal. I mean, there are things out there that it's your personal life, but we as HR people are often going to go look. And I think it's important for you to understand that depending upon the role, depending upon the company's position, those things may have an impact on your candidacy. And it's an uncomfortable thing to say, but it's reality. Not every organization, not every recruiting process is going to go as smooth as you may want it to. Check your background, check your social media. Make sure that whatever you're putting out there is something that you're comfortable with, because people during that job hunt are going to go look. Okay? Any thoughts on that, Chase?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first part is important for a lot of us here, and Chris would probably tell you there's a lot of protections around ADA, and you can't necessarily not get a job because you have a disease. Okay, but I've worked with people who hire people, and the reality is that's not always the case. They won't tell you that's why they're not hiring you, but that kind of happens. So from my perspective, as someone with PI, when do you tell the person you're applying for a job about it? I wouldn't, unless it's relevant, and honestly, it's not. It's not going to affect my job performance. It's not going to limit me in any way that I can think of, so I wouldn't bring it up. I think as zebras, we like to talk about our experiences, but when you're interviewing, you want to give your best foot forward. You want to be the best you possible to kind of showcase that you're the right candidate for this position. And everything speaks. That is just, even at Starbucks, we had managers who would Google a candidate and check out their Facebook, check out their friend's Facebook. It seems silly, but people do look at social media. They are going to probably search your name just to see who you are. It comes up. They'll find your X account and be mindful of what you post. I personally never did that when I was hiring people, because you tend to hire younger people at Starbucks, so the expectation is they're going to do young people things. But I know managers who looked for that. As far as everything speaks, also be mindful of the name on if you're doing a Zoom interview. We always forget what we set our name to, or it might be something silly, it might be not your name. It's just the little things you want to be careful of. I always personally like to do a pre-Zoom interview with a family member just to check that everything's okay, the background, the name, the mic works, the camera works, that I look appropriate, that the screen behind me is either blurred or it doesn't have anything inappropriate or silly. Because again, you want to put your best foot forward when you're interviewing, and that's your opportunity to shine, to be the star.
It's been a while since I've seen this. I'll use this quick example real quick. Something you said reminded me of this. With the Everything Speaks, your email address, okay? If you are in the middle of a job hunt, first name dot last name at whatever, if you can. You don't want something that's made up, that's weird, that's funky. I mean, the reality of it is that you want it to be easy. You want to be easy to be found. So make it easy for me to remember your email address. But also, When email addresses are created for social media, sometimes they get a little weird. There's an example of one that was a candidate that was really, really good. I'm not going to say what his email address was, but it was vulgar. And as soon as we saw that, we were done. Like, if that's what you would put out there for us to contact you, we're not gonna go with that. So let's dive into the other part of what HR does and does not need to know. When you are applying for a job, where those jobs are, you're going to be looking at Indeed, LinkedIn Jobs. There's a lot of different websites. Company websites are great. So if you find a company that you want to work for, you can sign up for reminders on their website. But in every job ad, every job description, there are what you'll consider called the essential functions of the position. So that basically is, what does the job require you to do? Some organizations will get really detailed. They'll say must be able to lift 50 pounds, must be able to stand for 10 minutes at a time. There's all kinds of those things. So if you look at the essential functions of the job, that's important. Look at those and say, okay, can I do all of this? Can I honestly do this? And the question that gets asked, and you'll see this on formal applications, is can you perform the essential functions of the job with or without a reasonable accommodation? Now that's a whole can of worms. It's a whole nother presentation about the idea of ADA and reasonable accommodations. But if you look at that and say, you know what, I can't do that unless they're willing to accommodate me in this way. At that point, there becomes a point in time where you're gonna apply for that job where the disclosure about PI becomes necessary. But if you can look at that and honestly say, no, I can do everything this job requires me to do. I have IVIG therapy, I do that, maybe it's once a month and I do that on Saturdays. It doesn't impact my job. Then they don't need to know. We do not need to know and we don't need to ask. So when you're applying for a position in that case, if you can say yes to, I can do this job with or without a reasonable accommodation, I don't need anything, I can do it all, there's no reason to bring it up. So now that also makes people nervous sometimes. They think, well, eventually something's going to happen, something's going to come up. There's all kinds of things in place to protect you for those events. Companies have sick time. As long as you're not burning through all your sick time really fast, again, there's not a need to bring it up. If you're with a company for a year, you have FMLA. Again, you don't need to bring it up. Some of those policies require you to have a conversation with the HR department because HR departments can ask for medical certification for things, but during the interview process, probably doesn't need to be brought up. We can talk about that in little specific situations as we go, but the reality of it is, again, one more time, if you can do the essential functions of the job and don't need any accommodation whatsoever, you do not need to disclose that you have a chronic illness. Make sense? I think you're going to have a question as we go.
Let me get John the mic because a lot of these sessions are recorded and I want to get everyone on the record.
So that being said, for disability, when they're doing an application or something like that, my one daughter, they ask on her, do you have a disability? Right. It has nothing to do with, like you said, can you do the job or reasonable compensation? But should not check that, you know what I'm saying, until she needs to disclose it.
Okay, so if you, most of the time when you check that box, there's not a follow-up question to that. The main reason there's not a follow-up question is because they do not want to then be on the hook for trying to discriminate against you because you disclosed it, right? So if the box is just checked, I don't have PI, but I'm blind in my right eye, I have a pacemaker, and I have a heart valve replacement. Technically, I can check that disabled box. I'll check the box. But there's no follow-up question to that because I'm not asking for an accommodation. When the accommodation is asked for, that's when the HR department, and I mean it's the HR department, that can ask for clarification. But if you're not asking for an accommodation, usually it's off limits.
Follow-up question would be for also a part of the resume. Let's say you weren't working for a period of time, year and a half. My other daughter has it. She hasn't been working for a year and a half because of her illness. Yeah. She's trying to get back into the workforce. And would that be brought up? Like, hey, why haven't you worked? If they decide to select you for something, would that be brought up and said?
So that will come up. I can almost sure you'd ask about that, would you?
So here's the thing. The focus for this is young adults applying for interviews. So on my end, no, I wouldn't ask because a lot of times the people I'm interviewing, they're younger. Right. So gaps are normal. Maybe they went to college, maybe they went to school, maybe they went backpacking across Europe. Depending on what you're applying for, that wouldn't mean anything to me. Now, if you're applying for like an executive level job, yeah, they're going to want to see, well, what were you doing? But for like, entry level or even just mid level, I never look at that. Even in construction, I personally, if it's a good resume that fits with me, I always want to connect with that person and then kind of get to know them. When I was at Starbucks, the idea was to feel them out and say, okay, are they approachable? Can they interact with customers? Can they deal with a high stress environment?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. As far as checking the disability box, I personally have never checked it, and my fear is always, is that going to taint their view of me?
Right.
Now, he can give you the HR.
Well, yeah, and again, going back to the question as before, is if the reality is that the job you're applying for does not require any sort of an accommodation from the company, then don't check the box. It really is what you're comfortable with. Yep. Yeah. Okay. The question in the back.
Let me get there. Let me get there.
So for some of the young adults in the room who are part of Teen Council or the Youth Advisory Committee or have done volunteer work for IDF, and maybe they have had a newspaper article about them or social media where their volunteerism is out there, they have a presence because of that. One, should they include their volunteer work on a resume? And two, if that presence is out there and they are asked directly about that organization, how do they handle that type of question?
Good question.
Do you want? I can dive into that if you want.
I always liked when people put volunteer work on the resumes because, again, I was looking for people who are outgoing, and people who are willing to do like the volunteer work tend to be more bubbly and outgoing. Yeah, I think it's a positive to add that to it, especially if you're a younger person who doesn't have a lot of like work experience. That can sort of fill in the gaps that show you know how to interact with the public and you know how to do the hard work.
So the other side of that, though, I think where we could also go is, okay, you are volunteering for the Immune Deficiency Foundation. Why did you choose that organization as the way? So, all right, so I'm going to let some little secrets out here. We have an individual in the audience named Darcy, okay? And Darcy's a member of React. And Darcy, I said earlier today, I said, can I plant you and ask you some questions for interview questions? So, and Darcy said, yeah, that's fine. So she sent me your resume so I could look at it. And one of the questions I was going to ask her was, I see you do a lot of interviewing for IDF. What's the connection? Now, that could be seen as the doorway into, well, I have this rare condition and however you want to, that's the doorway into that conversation. So if you're in an interview and you're asked that question, you can easily say, well, I have this, I have PI and I have CVID, but that doesn't impact my ability to perform this job in any way whatsoever. And then that should be the end of the conversation, quite frankly, at that point. But I would put the volunteerism on there because that carries more weight with the interviewer than anything related to the condition, especially if you are not requesting an accommodation of any kind. Yeah, absolutely, I'd put that out there. The volunteer work is huge, okay?
I have another question right here.
Yeah, real quick, and that was a wonderful question, but kind of a tactical thing that I feel like we're in a gray area in this time. Follow up to an interview. Should you send a handwritten note? Should you send an email? Or should you text? Or are any okay? Do you gauge it on the perceived age of the person you interviewed with? What's the gold standard right now?
This is a great question because there are ways that once we did things a certain way, and now because of technology and culture, we do it a different way. So I really like that question.
I think they're all really good, to be honest. For me, I've always valued people who put in the effort to kind of follow up. And I actually had someone I interviewed once, and it wasn't a great interview. So they followed it up, and I said, oh, we're not really interested. And they kind of pushed me to give them a chance, and I did. I hired them because they followed up. If that person hadn't have followed up, I would not have bothered. And I've gotten cards, I've gotten emails, I've gotten phone calls. It sort of just shows there's this like initiative, and it all works for me personally. Now, a text would be a little weird because I'd wonder how you got my phone number, but the rest, yeah.
I would agree. So, in all honesty, if you cover letter versus thank you letter, drop the cover letter, give me the thank you every time. The reality of it is, to echo Chase, if you text me, that's a little weird, but I still would appreciate the thank you. An email is perfectly fine. I love that. especially now this is I call it style points. If you can, in your thank you, put something in there about the interview itself. I was very, very interested in learning more about X, Y, Z that we talked about during the interview. Showing me you paid attention and you didn't send me some form letter, that's always impressive.
And we should clarify too, it's not just like the best practice, you should do that. You should follow up. If someone's interviewing a lot of people, they might go through 50 different people, 100 different people. They might forget who you were. That follow-up, the hey, I'm still interested, let me know how it went or give me feedback, that puts you up, top of mind again. So you want to follow up some way.
And let me just throw some numbers at you real quick. So standing out, why is standing out important? At IDF, we're a remote organization, right? We're based in Hanover, Maryland, but we have people in 14 different states. When I put a position out for something like, let's hypothetically say an accountant or somebody in our development team, I get at least 100 applicants. One position, I had over 600. So find ways to stand out in that crowd. And I think on the next slide, we're going to get into that a little bit.
And can we just touch on it real quick? I would be remiss if we forgot this too, because again, this is the young adults. If you go in for like an in-person interview, don't bring your parents. Your parents who are out there, you need to wait in the car. I know it's scary. I know you're letting these people, your children go for the first time. But as an interviewer, I can see mom and dad right there, like watching, and it's worse if mom and dad want to like be in the interview. It's your chance to let your kids sort of do it on their own, and they will learn a lot by doing it on their own. Even if it's scary, they will learn a lot.
I can honestly say I've never seen that happen, but obviously Chase has.
I do have a question over here, real quickly.
Okay.
So me personally, I have never disclosed my illness to any of HR, my bosses, my coworkers, anything like that. But now that I'm entering my career and having a job, I'm a contractor, so I work anywhere between 60 and 80 hours a week. So my question is, since I'm a contractor, I don't get sick days. So is it possible that because, for me, my biggest thing is definitely fatigue.
Right.
So is it possible that they could fire me? Is there
So this is, yes, there are some different nuances state by state. So this is where I'm going to make sure I'm careful with how we go about this because we're getting in the world of like legal advice. But state by state, there are different rules and regulations around hiring contractors. But for the most part, as a contractor, you do not get a lot of the protections that an employee would get with their work. So, for example, if you were, again, we talk about things like FMLA. A lot of states actually have policies in place that are even better than FMLA. What I mean by that is they kick in sooner. FMLA, you have to be an employee for a year. There are things like Maryland has a family act that kicks in after 6 months. So there are places like that kick in sooner, but that's for employees, not necessarily contractors. So yeah, it's possible that in that case, they would actually end your contract if you are unable to produce at the level that was whatever was agreed upon in your contract. So that's probably where I would look at the actual terms of your agreement within the contract. Now, definitely check your state laws as well because there are differences there. There are interesting rules state by state regarding things like volunteers, employees, and contractors, and they delineate what those are. So I would definitely do some digging into that. But yeah, as a contractor, you often don't get the protections. So unfortunately, I don't hate to share that is definitely a challenge as a contractor. So.
And to be honest, that directs, for myself, when I was looking for work, that directed me the way I went. And ultimately, becoming self-employed gave me the freedom to have sick days.
Yep. Okay. So, the interview itself, we're going to talk a little about this. I want to go make one real quick comment, though. That's one of the pro tips that I think I was on the slide. Getting interviews. How do you actually get selected to have an interview? How do you get in? How do you get there? One of the things I like to share with everybody that people don't often know, so it's kind of an HR perspective. Most employers have what's called an internal referral program. So if you, let's say for example, Kat, who works for IDF, if she brings me a resume, I am obligated to call that person no matter what, even if they're not qualified for the job. The reason is that Kat's got money on the line. So if it's an internal referral program, let's say it's $200. If I hire somebody, Kat gets $200. Well, if Kat No,
Is that true?
no.
Okay.
Not yet. Yeah,
Let's make
but come on,
clarifications
come
here.
on,
I have a lot of people in here who are like, oh, really?
know-
I'm going to send Kat my resume ASAP.
you know Jory though. Jory, within just for I gotta plug our CEO. One of the first things she did from an HR perspective, she came to me and she goes, I want a paid parental leave policy. I want to make sure that everybody in the organization who has birth or adopts a child can get up to 12 weeks of paid leave. And I said, okay, well, as it is right now, here are the things we have, but you want to pay people for 12 weeks? That means we've probably got this burden of 6 or 7 weeks out there. She's like, I want to pay them.
This is when the HR and Chris comes out.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, so you know what? We have a paid parental leave program, and it's fantastic. So, so I wouldn't doubt that at some point in time there'd be a referral bonus program down the road. But so
Well, then
anyway,
please send me your resume.
So if Kat brings me a resume and I never call it, she's going to complain because she didn't get $200 because I didn't even call her candidate. So I'm going to call it no matter what. So if you see a position with a company that you would like to work for, work your LinkedIn profile, connect with somebody who works there, ask them a favor. Hey, would you mind taking my resume in? You'd be surprised how often a complete stranger or somebody you met there would be happy to deliver your resume because they might just get $200. It works more often than you would think, and I've actually had it happen more than you think. My previous company did this. I would get a resume. I'm like, well, how do you know this person? Like, I met him on LinkedIn. Oh, do you actually know them? No. I still have to call them. So it's a really easy way to get your foot in the door somewhere where you're almost guaranteed a call. All right? So that's the job application pro tip. All right?
Yeah, I mean, it's networking, really. I mean, even when I worked at my prior job, I would ask the person, the barista on the register, like, hey, do you know that person who just came in? And if they're like, yeah, they're a customer, they're really cool, that puts them top of the list because you got to try to figure out how you can tell if a candidate is a good candidate in a short amount of time. So that personal connection, and in that same vein, just as you check into the interview and talk to the secretary, be friendly to everyone. The people in the doorway that let you in, be friendly because they probably will tell the person interviewing you, oh, they were really nice, or they'll tell them they were not very nice. You shouldn't hire them, and that holds weight. There's a lot of value to just referrals.
Yeah, absolutely. And any HR recruiter will tell you referrals are their best hiring tool, no doubt about it. Okay, so we're going to dive into a little bit more of the actual interview types of questions. And I mentioned we could get into this for an hour as well. Two primary types of questions people ask. Behavioral. Tell me about a time when. A lot of these starts with tell me about a time when, or give me an example of. Those are behavioral-based interview questions, and they ask you to give a specific example. Okay? There are open-ended questions. What do you think about Salesforce? What do you think about this system? What do you think about that system? How do you feel about accounting? These are open-ended, just however you want to phrase it. The two differences there are that one is going to ask for a very specific example, as I mentioned, which you should be prepared to answer, and the other one is just really more of an open-ended, and they're trying to see how you respond. Which one of those do you like better?
Oh gosh, I always went off the rails, to be honest. I would go into the tell me about a time when, but I found value in connecting with people and saying, hey, what do you like to do on a weekend? Because people are always nervous in interviews, so if you can get them to sort of open up and talk about something they're really into or their hobby, that can tell you the type of person they are, and if they can't do that, that also tells you the type of person they are. You want someone who can sort of say, oh, I like to go kayaking, I really enjoy this river or lake, and they say, okay, cool, tell me more about that, because then you can engage them and pull out the real person. And then, when it comes to construction, that's more challenging too. For me, it's less about tell me about a time you had a difficult experience and more about how do you feel working outside in the sun 8 hours a day? Are you able to deal with the hard labor in construction?
Chase, I'm going to interrupt you because you said something when we were brainstorming this session that really stuck with me. Is so your office is where?
Yeah, so I do a lot of work in Los Angeles, but my office is in Ventura County, which is about an hour and a half away from Los Angeles. Because construction has a lot of travel involved, whenever someone wants to interview, I say, cool, come to my office. Even though it might be a long drive for them, I want to see, are they willing to drive? And I've had a lot of people who want to interview who don't show up. And that right there just tells me, okay, they're not interested.
So something as small as, hey, come to this office where you might think, oh, why are they asking me to drive an hour, hour and a half? Well, they're trying to see whether or not you're going to follow through.
Yeah,
Right?
especially if it's a job that involves a
That's-
lot of driving. They want to
Exactly.
know, like, will you actually drive?
Yeah. I thought that was a great point. Thank you.
Absolutely. So the next thing you see up there, the bullet, the situation, action, result. This is the kind of gold standard for answering interview questions. So when somebody asks you a question, let's talk specifically behavioral-based questions. So if I said, tell me about a time you exceeded a goal and how did you accomplish it? What I'm expecting to hear from you, and in fact, you'll even see it if you're interviewing me, I'll write on my interview guide, I'll scratch S, A, and R. I'm looking for you to tell me what the situation was you were in, what's the action that you took, and what was the result of those actions. That's a complete interview answer. There are no one-word, really, interview answers. So in a behavioral-based question, you can hear you say, tell me at a time, give me an example of. I want the situation you were in, what's the action you took, what's the result of that action. So we'll practice this in a second. Ted, do you have a favorite interview question?
Yeah, so the one I did always like to ask was, tell me about a time you had a difficult situation and you weren't sure the answer and how you dealt with it. I like that one because it's kind of a trap. You kind of want to ask them, that sounds rude, but you kind of want to ask an interview candidate, tell me about something difficult, but you also want them to give a positive response where it had a positive outcome. If they can only say, oh, well, someone stole money and I didn't know what to do and we lost money, you don't really, that's not a great answer. A good answer is talking about a situation that was challenging but had a positive outcome where, oh, I had to do something. I wasn't sure how to do it, but we looked in the employee manual and we figured it out and I saved the day. That's an opportunity to sell yourself, and I always like to sort of, before I personally interview, go over things like that, like how I would speak to that, what I would say, what is the positive outcome. So I had something kind of lined up.
Yeah.
What about you, Chris?
Oh, my favorite one, I'll give it away. On the IDF phone interview, when I'm talking to you over the phone, I'm going to dive into your resume, but there are 4 questions I ask everybody, regardless of the position you're in, because they point right to our culture. My favorite one is the last one I ask. It's, how do you define integrity? And tell me how you've demonstrated that throughout your career. That stumps more people than you think. Because I'm throwing out the definition of integrity, but then you have to tell me how you've actually demonstrated that. So if you're coming right out of college, I might say, tell me how you've demonstrated that through your studies. And usually people have to think about it for a while, but they usually come up with some pretty good answers. But the definition of integrity part throws people for a loop. But I can learn more about the way you process things by how you define integrity more than you think. It's an interesting question. So, but I have a few others that I really like, but that's probably my favorite one. And I ask everybody who interviews with IDF that question.
I think something else we should speak to is, because this happens to a lot of people, you shouldn't be afraid of this, but if your prior job ended poorly, you got fired, you got let go, you got downsized, you don't necessarily need to say that. If someone says, like, oh, what happened to the last job, you could just say, you know, we parted ways, it wasn't a good fit, or I'm looking for something new, a different challenge. I had someone interview once who, when asked about their last job, they mentioned that they got fired for stealing and giving their friends free ice cream. And I'm like, well, gosh, thank you. I appreciate the honesty.
Right.
And then
Normally I send a rejection letter, but I'll have you come, here's yours right on the way out the door, right? So, okay. We are running really short on time. So we're working questions in. This is another thing we could talk about for a while. But we have a slide here that we're open to doing if anybody wants. We have mock interviews. Anybody willing to, and Darcy, you're kind of off the hook at this point if you want to. Go ahead.
Darcy is off the hook, but I think I have someone who has a question.
Okay, let's go.
So I'm gonna pass it to Josh.
All right.
And also because
Josh, you've been asked
he is
this
a
question.
volunteer for IDF, that means that you can also require other things of Josh.
Hello. Yeah, so the one question I was going to mention earlier was going back to the disclosure thing. How I say it in my interviews is, because I put IDF volunteer work on my resume. When they ask me, I say, yes, I'm involved with the community. I have an immune deficiency. I'm lucky enough to have recovered and live a very normal life. And now I want to provide help for others to do the same. And I sort of plant, like, I can do this job. I'm not going to be sick all the time.
Yeah.
How do you guys think of that answer?
That's a fantastic answer.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that while I would say don't disclose what you have, I never hide it.
Right.
If it comes up, if someone asks me, I own it. I'm proud of the life I've lived. I'm proud of the fact that I can do the work I do without needing accommodations because I'm fortunate. And it gives you an opportunity to connect with the interviewer. Say, yeah, well, this is what I dealt with. This is who I am. But I'm also able to do a lot more. And if you're lucky, they might even know someone who has a similar thing, and it gives you a chance to connect with that person.
So, and again, recognize that we would love to do mock interviews, but I don't know that we have time for mock interviews.
I'll take a question if you want.
How do you define integrity? And tell me how you demonstrate that throughout your career.
I would define integrity as holding yourself to the same standard to all people in all situations.
Okay.
You treat the garbage man the same way you treat the CEO. If you're honest to your family, you're honest to a stranger. Maintaining yourself to the same standard, no matter what the situation is. And I've always demonstrated that through my education and volunteer work and my careers. If I mess up, I own up to it and try to take responsibility to do better in the future.
Okay, so good answer, except one thing. All right, what was lacking in the answer there? An example. Someone said it. So you said I always do this. So now I'm going to follow that up with, but can you give me a specific example? And he's either going to give me one or he's not. So I have talked to people, behavioral-based interviews, that I go through an entire interview with, and they never actually give me a specific answer. So that tells me something. They're either not listening or not really willing to answer the question right. That is not a person who communicates well. So that's what we're after. We want to get if I say you need specific examples and I don't get one the entire time, that's a communication issue, right? So.
In defense, I'm going to say, you're welcome. I'm going to say that sometimes it's not a lack of ability to communicate. It is a lack of, in the moment, thinking of a specific example. But that's a great tip moving forward.
That's why I prepare.
Exactly.
I go over my head.
You always have to prepare, right? So think about specific examples of things that you have done. So take that SRA and think of situations, actions, and responses. Or I got it wrong?
Another little nugget real quick on those terms. If you want to know where my interview questions come from, it's really easy. Go to the company website. If you find things like core values, if there are principles, anything like that company uses, and let's say, one of the core values is honesty. Be prepared to answer an honesty question. It's coming at you. That's where we write our interview guides. It's not really that big of a secret. That's where they come from. So if you go to the website, you're prepared and you read it and really think about how you fit into those guiding principles or core values, you're going to ace that interview because that's where the questions come from. That's how they're looking to judge culture fit. So yeah, that's how you go about doing that. Just dive in and find those things. Essential functions of the job, core values of the company. Those are the core of the questions you're coming from. Okay?
I think it's fair to acknowledge, too, that interviews are scary. They can be stressful. You learn by doing them, but, when you interview people, I recognize that people, who, especially younger people, that they're nervous, and I get it. We should acknowledge that they can be scary.
Yeah.
Does anybody else want to give it a whirl and get a question from either Chase or Chris? Yeah?
Actually, I just have a question.
Yeah.
I remember back in the day when I would interview, is one of the questions that would stump me, and maybe you guys give a tip. They would ask, "Do you have any questions for us?"
Yes.
And I used to be like, "No, everything is
have
pretty
questions.
clear."
Have questions. And you ready to go first at this?
Oh gosh, that one's so hard because it always feels like that's your opportunity to answer with the perfect response. I always like to say, what do you like best about working here yourself? I want to, get a feel for the person giving you the interview, and that's also kind of a little trick. If the person interviewing you cannot tell you what they like about working where they work, that could be a bit of a red flag. That can kind of tell you, oh, uh-oh.
Okay, so I definitely love this when people ask questions for me, and if you have questions back, some good questions to dive into, anything related to organizational culture. Remember, the interview is about you wanting to work there as well. So it's not just all about, me asking you questions and you answering them. You have to want to be a part of that organization. So if you think about what you're looking for in an organization, you can do that right back to the HR people. You can say things like, I read on your website that this is the organizational culture. Can you demonstrate to us or give me an example of how you've implemented that on your teams? Go ahead and throw it back out, and we should be able to respond right back to you on that. If you can find anything about strategic plan, anything about the actual strategic initiatives of the organization, shows that you've done your research and you care enough to want to know what's going on in the organization. I would be wowed by that. If you showed me, you talk about advocacy, education, and research as how you achieve your mission. I'm going to be, first of all, impressed that you found that on the website. What's that?
Chris can talk for hours and hours and hours
okay, so
about
anyway,
this
yes,
topic.
yes.
And if you find him in the
I would answer
hallway
that
and you have a
question.
question, please do ask, because he is so passionate about helping people find the right position for them, as well as making sure that young folks have all the tools they need to get the best type of job for them. But I want to thank you both. I want to thank you, Chris and Chase, for not only your expertise, but your time and your commitment that you have shown to this session, and the love that you have shown to the young folks that are in this room and their parents who are looking for the hottest tips in how to get the best job. So, if you want more information about anything that was said here today, please do reach out to Chris Duckett at cduckett@primaryimmune.org. Also, join the discussion at our YA Get Connected groups. Riley, will you please just stand really quickly? This is Riley, and she moderates the Get Connected YA groups online. And coming in 2025 is Escape Weekend for teens. Make lifelong friends, empower yourselves on the PI journey. It's an all fun-filled weekend. And stay tuned for more details on that. Don't worry, because if you don't get an escape, you always get a PI conference that will always have a young adult track to it. And if you need any more information, don't hesitate to reach out to me, Kat Stieber, ksstieber at primaryimmune.org. Thank you again for joining, and give yourselves a round of applause, as well as one for our presenters.
If you are interviewing or you have a job interview coming up and you want to ask questions like that, I'm not